Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the patriotic riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. Canada is the only G7 nation intentionally depriving its population of food by using tariffs on Russian fertilizer shipments, essentially a 30% tax on fertilizer. To reduce the money available for Putin for his war machine to invade Ukraine, Canada slapped tariffs on fertilizer imported from Russia. Many farmers had already ordered their fertilizer the year before to be delivered in the spring of last year when Putin attacked Ukraine. The farmers were told the retroactive tariffs, the taxes they had to pay before they knew Russian fertilizer would be banned, was to be returned to farmers through programming. Consumers are paying up to 50% more to feed their families for some Canadian-grown products, and the tax tariffs Trudeau collects on farmers goes towards making him look good on the world stage. No meat or eggs on the table this week? Seek solace in knowing you're doing without is helping Trudeau rehabilitate his international reputation as a fool. Trudeau says this sacrifice on the part of Canadians, other than himself, who's fed on the taxpayer's dime, is worth taking a stance in support of international rules. Baloney. Plant-based baloney, that is. Nitrates in fertilizer are derived from nitrogen, one of the atmospheric gases the climate-crazed, costly Liberal NDP coalition is making Canadians pay dearly for. That is why Trudeau has banned fertilizer imports from Russia. Worst of all, Russia sells the fertilizer to the Communist Party of China at discount prices. This is the same foreign government that test drove a surveillance airship over military installations across the Pacific, through Canada, and down through the United States until it had what it needed, then had it taken down. They waited until the balloon had gathered all the information from its surveillance equipment because the leadership of our countries did not want to offend the cash-rich regime. The fall of the Berlin Wall back in 1989 ended the Cold War. The Cold War was an ongoing hostility between the then Soviet Union and the United States. It was called the Cold War because no war had been officially declared. Once what was perceived to be the end of the nuclear arms buildup, Canada decided to take a Ferris Bueller's Day off for over a decade. Our military refers to this period as the Decade of Darkness. The Canadian Armed Forces became the Canadian Forces. Our soldiers were carrying out buffer zone missions abroad using World War II equipment and uniforms. A helicopter purchase to replace the fleet that was falling from the sky was canceled. Our Northern early warning system was dismantled, just like our pandemic early warning system that was dismantled by the Liberals right before COVID hit. Our tanks were mothballed. Entire regiments were disbanded. No new ships were built, and our shipbuilding industry died. Canada lost the capacity to even build more. By the time 9/11 hit, the Decade of Darkness had claimed 70% of the Army. While checking on our troops in Bosnia in August of 2001, the then parliamentary secretary who accompanied me, the parliamentary secretary of defense, pointed to an armored vehicle and bragged how Canada was able to remove its mortar launches thanks to the peace dividend. That was the first time I'd heard that term. It's still being used. But now it refers to the fact that some countries neglected maintaining their national security while Russia and the People's Republic of China, the PRC, modernized and expanded their militaries. The Chinese Communist Party has tripled its number of nuclear weapons. That's not deterrence. That is preparation for an attack. Next to the United States, Canada's closest neighbor is Russia. The socialists crow how Russia can't even handle the Ukraine conflict it started. It can't do anything to us, so military spending is a waste. The socialists want to spend the money on social programs instead. There's a huge problem with socialism. Eventually, you run out of other people's money. We see that in our broken healthcare system. After September 11th, 2001, Canada agreed to invoke the Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO. That's the NATO provision that states if a NATO ally is the victim of an armed attack, each and every other member of the alliance will consider this act of violence as an armed attack against all members, and will take actions it deems necessary to assist the ally attacked. At that time, our military had been hollowed out of its people and its equipment to send them on to what needed to be done. The mission in Afghanistan was to stop and prevent it from becoming a launch pad for terrorism. We had no heavy lift helicopters, so our soldiers had to be inserted into position by land. We unnecessarily lost many lives and sustained critical injuries, seen and unseen. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. That was Mark Twain who said that. Here we are again. We're now in a frozen conflict with the communists who control from Beijing. Our military strength has been gutted by the Prime Minister and Finance Minister who've never taken the security of Canada seriously. The Liberals waited years to ban Huawei, a state-owned communications technology company subservient to the PRC communist regime. Our Five Eyes security partners for months urged our government until it was finally shamed into banning Huawei. Since then, Canada has been left out of security agreements. Our early warning radar has gaps large enough for a balloon the size of 3 buses to get through. The PRC has reportedly mastered the technology to deploy swarms of airborne drones. The owners of the surveillance balloon that floated through Canada unseen essentially mapped a course these swarms could fly through if it wanted to. Our second closest neighbor, currently committing war crimes in Ukraine to the west of it, has an entire naval base in the Arctic. Russian ground troops may be depleting, but its navy and nuclear missile systems are fully operational. Canada doesn't even have a fueling station in our far north. We have no way to see beneath the ice up there because our submarines, catastrophically flawed when originally purchased, cannot stay beneath the ice for very long. The new fighter jets on order, canceled once Trudeau took power, were just reordered weeks ago and won't be ready for years. Canada had to beg off our NATO policing commitment. Worst of all, our people, the military's strongest asset, are leaving in droves. Even our national defense is broken. The costly coalition cries poor when it comes to the defense of Canada, but prints money to give to the phony charities that amplify the Liberals' campaign when the next election comes. It's time for a change. We can't afford not to. Over the last week, legacy media outlets all began singing the same song. In the US, CNN's headline reads, "How 15-minute cities turned into an international conspiracy theory." Over in the UK, The Guardian wrote, "Tackling the 15-minute cities conspiracy means fixing inequality." Here in Canada, the Globe and Mail got into the action with the headliner, "Edmonton is the latest 15-minute city to be caught in a global conspiracy theory." According to CNN, the so-called 15-minute conspiracy theory is actually part of a bigger conspiracy by the fossil fuel industry to discredit climate action. The Globe and Mail says this is all just a misunderstanding over mundane urban zoning issues. Move along, nothing to see here. So why is all the legacy media suddenly seeming to be reading from the same prepared script again? What are those so-called 15-minute cities anyhow? What exactly is going on? Once again, this is not about making a city more livable. This is about radical climate policies being disguised under slogans like 15-minute cities. Canada's total emissions of the worldwide emissions is 1.6%. So, of all the emissions all over the world, Canada emits 1.6% of it. The communist regime based in Beijing is excluding its country for the time being. Canada's net zero edict is to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. This means all carbon emissions must be sequestered or paid for through carbon credits to zero by 2050. A goalpost along the way is to have 30% of Canadian land and water set aside for conservation by 2030. Another one is to draw a complete halt to all oil and gas production within the next 8 years. Major restrictions will be placed on mining and agriculture. For example, nitrogen use must be cut by 30% by 2030. Nitrogen, as we talked about earlier, is a component in agricultural fertilizer. That means farmers must find a way to replace 30% of their fertilizer. They're already using all the latest technology available. For example, geomapping to ensure only the soil actually needing fertilizer gets it. The timing of the spreading of fertilizer is done to ensure maximum absorption and minimal emissions. The costly coalition running Canada at the moment has declared only electric vehicles will be permitted to be sold by 2030. One Ontario city passed a plan to ensure it is compliant by 2050. Its Energy Evolution Plan calls for 15-minute neighborhoods and includes building 710 industrial giant wind turbines higher than the Peace Tower within the city limits, building 36 square kilometers of solar panels within the city bounds, banning the use of gasoline-powered vehicles of all kinds, banning cars of all kinds within portions of the downtown area, outlawing the burning of natural gas to heat homes, banning all natural gas appliances. Costs to pay for the necessary infrastructure will be raised by levying a $118 registration fee for every car in the city. Hefty tolls will be in place to drive on city streets. $20 will be charged for each vehicle to enter the city. No mention of exemptions for medical appointments is made. GPS tracking will be required. All new homes must be heated with electricity. This was voted on July 6, 2022, and approved by the majority of the City Council. All measures must be in effect by the year 2050. Municipality by municipality, this radical liberal NDP coalition is imposing poverty and starvation on large numbers of our people. Last week, we learned that Google was not returning search results for Canadian news media websites for some users. Google said it was conducting a test on 4% of users in case the Liberals go ahead with Bill C-18. C-18 is the Online News Censorship Act. Since 2019, Justin Trudeau has been pushing 3 pieces of legislation to fundamentally alter how Canadians use the internet. The first is to regulate what you can see and hear online. That's C11, the Online Streaming Censorship Act. Second is C18. This is to force Google and Facebook to pay legacy media companies. The goal with C18 is to limit what you can read online, and it's already started. The third is the so-called Online Harms Bill, yet to be retabled. That bill is aimed at regulating what you can say on the internet. Together, these bills aim to create the kind of government control over the internet only found in authoritarian countries. For most Canadians, the streaming censorship bill will hit their wallets. The Liberals had to pull their first attempt at online harms when every group in the country, from conservative think tanks to far-left socialist organizations, spoke out against it. But C18, this bill to force one search engine and one social media company to subsidize the entire Canadian media industry is a threat to democracy itself. Here's why. Google said they were running a test on 4% of users. This means that for the last week, 4% of Canadians who Googled Justin Trudeau communist interference had no search results returned. If this bill passes, Google and Facebook will be forced to stop Canadian news sites from being linked to on their websites. These companies will have no choice. The Liberals and the Canadian news media industry are lying. They say that Google and Facebook are profiting off the news media industry's content. That's a lie. Google and Facebook are not making billions from the news media. They're profiting from you and your data. Once upon a time, television broadcasters and local newspapers had a monopoly on the ad business. They were gatekeepers of information and access. The internet changed that. The news media industry lost its monopoly on information and access to your attention. Now new types of media are popping up, media which does not rely on big business interests buying ads. But that new media needs to be discoverable on social media and search engines. Justin Trudeau doesn't want you to hear those voices. He knows Google and Facebook will have no choice but to kill links to Canadian news. He only wants you to hear one side. The best example of how Trudeau needs to control the media was the reporting on the Emergencies Act Commission. The legacy media tried to spin this as a win for Justin Trudeau. Justice Rouleau said Canada's system is so broken that Trudeau was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act. But that's not all. Justice Rouleau said the Liberals and the media spread misinformation about the convoy. He said the government did nothing to enable peaceful protest after declaring the Emergencies Act. When Trudeau declared his fake emergency, I urged Canadians to put away the offensive flags, leave the car in the parking lot, and protest on the lawns of city halls, provincial legislatures, and on the lawn of Parliament Hill. That's exactly what Justice Rouleau said Trudeau should have done. Some Liberal-funded journalists said I should have been arrested for encouraging peaceful protest. It's clear from the report that the Liberals and their media allies were caught in a narrative feedback loop. Before the convoy, the Liberals were feeding stories about the organizers to the media. Then the media ran with that narrative, and the Liberals started to believe their own spin. Trudeau demonized the protesters so much, he began to be afraid of the demon he created in his own mind. Justice Rouleau said invoking the act was justified because Trudeau's fear was real. Rouleau's not saying the demon is real. He's saying Trudeau was really petrified of his imaginary demon. A case is still before the federal court, which will determine the legality of Trudeau's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. No matter what, history will know that under Trudeau's rule, Canada became so broken. Justice Rouleau concluded invoking the Emergencies Act was the reasonable thing to do. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant. How was it?